Good morning and welcome to Community Conversations. I'm Vicki Green. This is another show that I feel I must give a disclaimer. The views expressed during the show do not represent the views of these radio stations. So with that, strap on the seatbelt. We're talking with who some may argue is one of the most, if not the most, influential senators on Beacon Hill. She was Senate President last year due to some investigations around the current Senate President at the time. She was the first woman elected to the state Senate from Worcester back in the 1990s. I'd like to welcome Madam President Harriet Chandler.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here. I greatly appreciate it. I've wanted to meet you for a long time, and I've been at events with you, but never got to sit down with you. So, for the record, you represent Worcester, Clinton, Boylston, West Boylston, Holden, Princeton,
Northborough.
Parts of Northborough. Okay. So, something I didn't realize until I had a guest in here and said, Senator Harriet Chandler? You mean Harley? People in the circles, and I've heard on TV, I heard someone just call you this. Where did Harley Chandler come from?
I've had the name since I was 10 years old. I got it at camp because I went to a camp where the owner's name was the same as mine. My name is Harriet Natalie, and her name was Harriet Natalie. And so we take the H-A-R, and although I spell mine with the Natalie, L-I-E, she spelled it L-E-E, and she said, "You're me, and I want you to have this name." And so that's been my name ever since I was 10 years old. And people who went to camp with me call me that from the time I was 10 years old. People who went to college with me call me that. I can tell who really doesn't know me because they'll call me Harriet, which is my real name and which I use.
But at the State House, do people call you Harley or they call you Senator?
They call me Senator at this point.
Okay.
It depends. But they call me, I'm just as happy when somebody calls me Harley.
But how many people that don't know you say, does she drive a Harley?
No, a lot of people say that. A lot. No, I don't. I don't.
But the people that know you, I don't think would be surprised about that.
No, they probably wouldn't.
I wouldn't be, because I said the same thing to myself, to Kevin O'Sullivan, who was here from MBI, who just retired from biotech, because you're 81 years old.
That's right.
You have 3 kids, 4 grandkids. You were Senate President last year.
Now I am Senate President Emerita.
Emerita. Okay, right. So I still call you Madam President. I mean, I think that's a respectful thing to do. But you grew up in Delaware. How did you get to Worcester?
I went to Wellesley College. And when I went to Wellesley College, the first day of my first year, the first day of my first week of my first year, I met this really attractive senior at Harvard who came over to sort of look the new crop of freshmen over. I thought he was really very arrogant and wasn't impressed at all. And he called me up and asked me out, and I couldn't go out my freshman year of college, yeah. And that was the beginning. I couldn't go out with him because I had another date. And we met again at a Hillel mixer about 3 weeks later.
Which is a Jewish.
And I needed a ride home, and so did the people I came with from Cambridge. And so we all got in the car, and that was the beginning of a relationship that has gone on. It'll be 60 years in July.
So you ran for school committee in Worcester at an age when a lot of people start to think about retiring.
But let me tell you why I ran for school committee. I'm an only child, Vicki, and my daughter's name is Vicki, so I feel a natural affinity to you. I'm an only child, and my father had died, and my mother was living in Wilmington, Delaware, and I brought her up here because she was sick, and I quit my job to take care of my mother. She had a lot of things, but breast cancer was
and you did too, which I didn't know.
I did too, but she didn't know that she had it, and she would never say the word cancer, which was true in those days. And anyway, in reading the newspapers, I went and took care of her every single day until she finally went into the Jewish Health Care Center. I got involved in that, and that's another story in Worcester.
On Salisbury Street.
And ultimately became the president of the Jewish Health Care Center. But I began to think to myself, life is short, and I've got to, it's time for me to give back. Life has been good to me, and I really should give back. And what what way can I give back? Well, Worcester was at that time talked about as a place where nobody wanted to move to Worcester because the school system was bad. And I thought to myself, what do I have to offer? I have a really good education. That's what I have to offer. And while there were no openings on the school committee, I thought to myself, I'm going to run anyway.
Wow.
And
What year was this?
this was in 1991. Mm-hmm. And I thought, I'm going to run anyway because I believe I really have something to offer. And I did. And I won.
So your kids were in college?
My
or-
kids were in 1991. My youngest child was in college, and the other two had graduated. And so I had time. I had quit my job, which I'd always worked, and
Didn't you work in high tech for a while?
I worked in high tech for
Because you
a
got
while.
an MBA. People need to understand. You went to Wellesley, then you went to Simmons, then you went to Clark.
No, it was the
Right?
other way.
I mean, no,
went to Wellesley.
Clark, Simmons.
Right.
But you have an undergrad. You have a BA.
I have a BA from Wellesley. I have an MA from Clark and a PhD from Clark, and Clark gave me an honorary degree in 2016.
Well, I bet you have more than one of those. But so you were elected then from school committee. You were elected state representative, and you
right.
did that 3 terms. Right?
I went state representative 3 times. I should tell you that on the school committee, I came in second that first year. I'd never run for anything, but the person who came in first was Eddie Augustus. So that was my first time working with Eddie Augustus. I love Eddie.
Current city manager, because a lot of people listening are
right.
not from this city.
And then ultimately, a few years later, I came back. He ran for the Senate too, and we worked together in the Senate. So I think, it's a good working relationship.
But you're still there, which
I'm still there.
which is crazy. And I don't know what keeps you going. You're 81 years old. You keep serving in public office. It's long hours, long days. I've said before that I've worked with folks. I've been in the State House on a daily basis. I've been in the Capitol for several months. And so I don't think people realize, number one, I know, and it's been said many times, you walk down the street, people don't know who their state senator is. They don't know who their Congress people are that go to Washington. They don't know who their mayor is or their governor is. Not everybody.
But Vicki, the thing that keeps me going is the fact that in my position, I can get an awful lot done. And if you don't care who gets credit for it, and I don't, as long as I get it done, that's the important thing. And I've really been able to do an awful lot of things. And I guess you can find my fingerprints over most of what's happened in this is my 25th year in the legislature, but a lot of people have made that happen with me. You don't do it alone, and if you don't care who does get credit for it, it's a group effort in many cases. You can be very proud of what you've done.
But I got to say, and I know I don't want to spend too much time on the national political scene because you are in the state scene. However,
and that's where the action is right now because there's so much trouble getting anything accomplished at the federal level that it's up to the states now to get work done, to get really needed things done. Climate change is going to occur at the state level.
wait, you mean there's climate change?
Yeah.
I'm being
But I know you're
facetious.
being facetious, but that's where the action is, and we can get things done because we do work across the aisle.
But do you think that I'm playing devil's advocate on a few things, and I will through this show, that a Republican in Massachusetts and the ideals of a Republican in Massachusetts is not necessarily the same
You're right.
as one in the Midwest or in other parts of the country? And that when people say to us, because I used to think it all the time, we have a Republican governor. We had Mitt Romney. We had Bill Weld. We've had Republican governors in the past, always Democratic Congresses and House and Senate. However, we've rarely had issues with bipartisanship or something not passing and somebody blaming the other party 50 ways to Sunday. Has it happened? Sure. But does it happen to the extent that it happens on the national level? And
No.
But people say, can't we look at Massachusetts? And over the opioid crisis, they were saying, well, maybe Governor Baker should get more credit. He's been on the national scene about that. But Massachusetts is an anomaly, is it not?
It's an anomaly in that we all kind of get along together when we have to. And, I'm sure that, I have differences with the Baker administration, and they have differences with me. But when push comes to shove, I think our goals are the same. We want a better life for the citizens of Massachusetts. And what may differ is how to get there. That may be the difference. But I think we want to improve life and the quality of life in Massachusetts.
Now, on that note, you've been behind legislation. There's so much I can't even tell you. If somebody went back and looked, in 25 years. But let's look at some of the present day things. One being, and some of them are controversial on a national level as well, but it doesn't seem to faze you. You said before, I've heard you say, people say that you say you're a workhorse, not a show horse.
I am.
You're there to get the job done, and if you believe in something,
I will work to make sure it gets done.
And you've been doing that since
I arrived.
Since you tried.
I don't know any other way of doing it.
Teach or college, and it's funny because you're an only child, right? So, I have a daughter, and she's an only child, and it's funny because you don't necessarily have siblings to look at or look up to, so you have to come up with your own kind of mentors.
But you're used to doing that. That's what an only child is used to doing. They're used to being there. If they want to get something done, they can't depend on their brother or sister to do it, and their parents have given them a lot of love. Mine did, and I'm sure, Vicki, you've given your daughter a lot of love. There was no sharing of that because that's all you had, and that's all they have is you, and it makes a huge difference. And I guess I wanted my parents to be proud of me, and my parents were older, so it made it even a little more special for me. But they didn't live to see some of this happen to me. But
I think people can still see. That's my own opinion.
Yeah.
But you've been behind legislation. Let's talk about some recent things. There's a civics bill, but in line with that, we're going to talk. I want you to explain what your civics bill is. That passed, right? That's law.
It passed. It was signed into law in November.
Right. So
we're at the American Antiquarian Society.
Oh, they did. Oh, really? Oh, I didn't even look at the location of the actual signing. But with that, we're going to talk about that in a second. But with that, there's something that's pending now where you're part of this legislation that's filed that is looking at allowing municipalities to decide on their own whether 16 and 17-year-olds should be allowed to vote. Mm-hmm. Okay, so
in municipal elections. In the municipal elections.
So we're not talking
about presidential. We're talking about municipal elections with the understanding that they're closer. That's closer to them. That's the school committee. That's their city council. And we think of that as something that they have a stake in, a much greater stake than if it were the national elections or the statewide elections.
Okay, devil's advocate. Do you think my daughter's 19 and did not vote this year that she was allowed to, but I was happy for that because I asked her if she downloaded the booklet that we all get in the mail, that all Massachusetts residents, it shows you both pros and cons, what the bill says, the language, whose side is for it, whose side is against it, and how to explain it. She said she hadn't read it. I said, then you know what? Don't get it. Don't vote. If you want to, it's your right, but be educated about it. Do you think 16 and 17-year-olds literally know enough?
I hope so. I hope so because for two reasons. Number one reason is that this civics education program that we were signed into law last November, offers a course in three things. And it's a year course. It's required. It's mandatory, which we think is necessary. There are so many young people that really have no understanding of how their country is run. They don't understand anything. They can't tell you who their governor is. They can't tell you who their rep is.
Right, if adults can't, 16-year-olds.
Right, so why would 16 and 17-year-olds? And yet there's some 16 and 17-year-olds. And here in Worcester, we have a group called the Hope Coalition who are quite wonderful. They get involved and they do some terrific things. But they have to be educated. And in many cases, their parents don't know as much as they should either, so they can't be the educators. And maybe the school steps in at that point and provides them. The three parts of the program are, one, some interest, some background in history, the American Revolution, how it happened, why it happened, the issues, the Articles of Confederation, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution.
But isn't that already in history?
No.
It's not a requirement.
It's not a requirement.
But some schools do it.
Some schools do it, but it's hit or miss. Okay. The second part, and this is really important, is the idea of how to do critical thinking, how do you determine what's fake news and what isn't fake news?
I'm not going.
Don't go there.
That's
Don't
an
go there.
hour. I'm so passionate
but
about
I
that.
know you are, but people don't understand that, and lots of kids just take this. They're so confused by what this is, and yet that little cell phone that they have, an iPhone, a cell phone, that can lead them into all kinds of information that can help them tremendously. And the third part of this is some sort of an experiential learning project, a project in which they get involved with a group of people. Now, in the corporate world today, most efforts become a group effort. You work in a group. And we want to teach kids how to work in a group, because 1 + 1 = 3 in a group. You learn so much from that. And that's why when I chair a meeting, when I'm part of a group, it's always important to get out all the information, all the ideas that the whole group has. And our feeling is once they get involved, and these projects would be something that would come from their own environment, their own school, their own community. And our thought is once they get involved in something like that, and maybe they get involved in a campaign, that would be a great thing.
I'm seeing more of that now. I will say, I said this to my mother when my mother went to Wellesley and Simmons, different time than you, but I did tell you were coming in, and I said, Mom, I don't remember being in college, and it was Cold War, but I don't remember any reason for protests or, getting out in college and having to go to these rallies. And now my daughter's 19, but she's got friends, they've been doing this since they were 17, 18, 19. Now they're protesting if there's something at the national level.
They found their voice.
Yeah. I don't know that we were even looking for it, is the point. Or I don't remember even I'm a passionate political person, but I don't remember ever feeling I needed to take a stand.
But once you get involved in a project, you get hooked.
Yeah.
It's an amazing thing. Politics is it's that kind of a thing that you really get hooked, and you can't let go of the interest.
All right, so let's stay on education.
Okay.
Let's stay on education for a minute. Chapter 70 funding. This is to do with Massachusetts funding.
It's the school funding.
Right, school funding. Now, I'm not going to pretend to know the ins and outs of it, so I'm going to ask you this question. I happen to cover the city of Marlborough, and when I write for a newspaper, and the mayor of Marlborough happens to be the head of the Massachusetts Mayors Association this year. He was just elected. So I asked him, what are what amongst your peers are the most top 3 things that people are discussing? Number 1 was education funding, and it has to do with, without going into heavy detail, what he did say was that they're looking closely at the governor's budget, because we're still at that level, right? It hasn't gone out to the House yet. It's still the governor's proposal. They're looking in the early stages of the funding, and he's saying that it's a large amount of money, but the amount of money goes to goes to a very small amount. The majority of the money goes to a handful of communities. But it affects, particularly, he said, public schools that have a charter school and a tech school, because of the way the funding is for all of those, and the choices that a tech school can choose the people they have. So are they going to do better?
What is at fault here is the funding formula. And
Right.
there has been a committee to look at funding for the education formula, which hadn't been touched for 25 years before it was done in 1993. That was the original thing, and that's the way it's been. And the groups that had the most say in that were probably wealthier communities. And we always feel a little bit uncomfortable because we out in the central part of Massachusetts and the western part feel like we've been left out, especially if we have large non-English speaking populations or poor populations. And that's what broke down the education funding formula program last year. That was not included, and we felt Worcester, which I represent, felt very strongly it should be represented because we weren't getting the money we should be getting. There's another piece to this, though, Vicki, and let me just add this. Those 6 towns that you mentioned.
A handful, I don't know.
Well, there's 6.
Okay.
And of them, I have 3 regional school systems. they haven't looked at those. That wasn't even included in the funding formula. And
Like a Wachusett.
like a Wachusett, which is the oldest of all of them, and which every time we get into budget season, boy, there's controversy there. It's the poorer against the those who are more affluent, and that's a problem. 'Cause things have changed in 25 years.
Sure. Is there a way, an easy way, and if there's not, don't have to do this, is there an easier way to explain how the funding goes to what towns?
There's a
Is it by MCAS score? Is it
There's
by,
a strict formula. It's by town. It's by wealth. It's by population.
So why would wealthier towns get more money?
Well, things have changed from where we started, and that hasn't changed with it.
So the formula has to change. Got it.
And we are arguing over the formula. And it will be interesting to see how this works out. It's very important to the towns. Worcester's talking about a lawsuit with Brockton. So, I mean, this is important to us.
Okay, so let's switch gears on another issue.
Okay.
You deal with a lot of women's issues. Here's one that's fairly controversial. Again, my guest in studio, for those of you that may be just joining us, is Senator Harriet Chandler, who is Senate President Emerita, meaning I still call her Madam President. She was the state Senate President last year, and is still currently in the Senate after been representing as a rep and a senator and in school committee for 25 plus years, been in office. So let's talk women. This is a controversial issue, reproductive rights. There's currently a bill, and I'm surprised, frankly, it hasn't gotten more press. Maybe because it's the level. It's just starting for this legislative season. So explain this, because we know that looking at what just happened in New York, which is not the same thing, but anytime you talk about abortion or ending a pregnancy, there's going to be, you've done this before because you fought for the buffer zone for, I know years ago, for the clinics. And I was very much involved, saw that firsthand with friends who happened to live near a clinic. And, people would just get inundated. That was a big move. And that's when the gentleman came in and shot.
It was a long time ago.
Planned Parenthood. Yeah, I'm trying to think it back, but now it's coming to me, and it wasn't. So that was very important. So now, what's the current bill about having to do with late-term
abortion?
Or abortion?
Abortion and reproductive rights have always been a very controversial subject. It's uncomfortable for a lot of people to talk about, especially men, and yet more and more, it is a subject that requires people to talk about it, because reproductive rights, as women have learned that they have a voice in this. In olden times, it was an issue for men to decide. It was, old white men who made the decision about not allowing abortion, not allowing contraception. But that is less and less the case as women have started to, in this last election, we've seen a lot of women join the legislatures. And let me give you one other word about why I'm so interested. As a child growing up in Wilmington, Delaware, and women my age, and you know how old I am, I'm 81, women my age and until about 1960, the late 60s, when the pill was developed here in Shrewsbury.
That's right, I used to live near that.
Okay, so that was a very important thing. That changed women's lives. That freed women in many ways to make decisions. But before that, women would get pregnant at times when they were not married or did not feel they could bear a child and could not give the child the kind of life they would like. And they had no legal, safe way of having an abortion or stopping that pregnancy. And more in the area I grew up in Delaware, I would read the newspapers. I loved the newspapers. I was a junkie from being a young kid.
Too.
And what I would see was the number of backstreet abortions. A backstreet abortion was to go someplace with somebody who probably was not a doctor and who would butcher a young woman so that they either could have no more children or would die in the process.
But the flip side to that, obviously, this whole argument is, well, couldn't she have just carried that baby to term if it wasn't a medical issue and then give it up for adoption or whatever?
That of course is possible, but that has some issues to deal with too, and more women, now that they have the choice, let us say that contraception is probably the first choice and abortion is the last choice that anybody. Abortion should not be a means of contraception. It should not be that. But the piece of legislation that we are talking about today, which we call the Roe Bill, is basically saying that it's focused on two things. It's focused on making abortion safe and legal, and it is also focused on removing the 24-week limit to when
Meaning
one
you could have an abortion after 24
you could
weeks.
have an abortion after 24 weeks, because some of the reasons you'd have an abortion after 24 weeks, in fact, I would say most of the reasons you'd have an abortion after 24 weeks would be some terrible, tragic thing that occurs in the pregnancy itself. It may affect the mother. It may affect the pregnancy itself. And as such, some people would call it a fatal fetal anomaly, where, and there are many ways that this can happen. But for that situation, there is little chance of a child being born normally from this. There is some fatal problem.
So currently, if it's after 24 weeks, they don't have a choice.
They
would
don't have
to
a choice
carry
unless
them
they can,
stillborn.
unless they can go someplace else and have an abortion after 24 weeks. And there are places that they can go, but that's expensive. That means if they're young, that means leaving school, that means time off, that means having the resources to do that sort
You
of
mean
thing.
out of state?
Out of state, because you can't do it in Massachusetts. And this puts an enormous, it might not be a young person, it might be an older woman who is pregnant, maybe in her early 40s, 50s, whatever, and cannot, or a woman who cannot afford to have another child, just can't manage it. So this is one of the reasons. We don't look at this as something that we advise everybody to do, because
You just
it's
want
not,
people to have the right.
they should have the choice.
Now,
they
doctors,
should have the choice.
doctors don't have the choice currently either, do they?
No, nobody has the choice of doing.
So if a doctor knows there's going to be a problem and the woman's going to die, he can't do anything about it unless this bill passes.
Thank you for saying that.
Well, no,
because
I'm
that's
just trying to
important.
rectify it.
That's important, Vicki. Doctors don't have the choice. And why should doctors do it? Well, doctors, the decision to have an abortion is a decision that should be made between a patient and her doctor. It really is not a patient. It is not something that the government should have any say in.
All right. Well, we have to wrap up soon, but I knew that this could be, I could talk to you all day. You have two big issues. I just want to highlight affordable housing, which we won't go into now, but that's a big issue of yours that you're on top of. And I think with the Red Sox coming, there's been talk of whether or not people are going to, with all these new great mixed-use residential developments, whether or not that's going to drive the cost up, and therefore low-income housing could be limited. Now, if you look at the percentages that I did of most of the cities, it's by population. The cities with the bigger developments seems like are well over the 10%.
And we're
All of your community,
yeah.
well, all your larger ones.
All
But I mean, if
larger.
you look at small communities like Boylston, there just isn't a lot of housing, period. So while the state has the goal of making 10%, Worcester's at like 13 point something percent. I mean,
Yep, you're
it's
right.
well, but is that number going to go? There's concern now that the number may decrease, or the number of developments coming. They want to make sure that they have, like at the courthouse, and say after the park is built, which is just so exciting. I think we're finally getting our due maybe in Worcester because of that, but we knew we had it all along. One last thing that I read is about the. I was shocked about this. The number of kids. I can't believe there had to be a bill about this. It was about. I'm trying to find it. Act to End Child Marriage in Massachusetts.
Yes.
So I saw an article in the Telegram before we end that as of the current law, as of several months ago, allowed girls to marry at age 12 and boys at age 14, and this law is from the 1850s. So how serious is this really? I mean, is this an issue we should be focusing on?
I just heard on the radio, because I get a lot of my news on the radio as I drive back and forth
Yay.
to Boston. But there is a real problem about people having, brides that come over from the old country who are very young. And that is an issue. And they're in one part of the country, they're talking about making a law that would make sure that the bride is of legal age in the community they're going to live in. We're not even talking about that. We're talking about young brides that are forced into marriage.
That live in Massachusetts.
That live in Massachusetts.
So where are we
Absolutely.
at with that? So they can't marry. Has that passed?
No, we're still moving it along. We're
Okay.
still moving it along. I mean, in some cases it's cultural. In some cases
Yeah.
there are arranged marriages with very young women. In other cases it's an older man perhaps who forces a young woman into marriage. I mean, has arranged a marriage with a very much younger
I just didn't even know that was an issue
It
in
happens.
Massachusetts, but it does, because if you look at the numbers, which I'm not going to go into detail, there's enough of a reason that it's come to the legislation to become that important that we need to do something about it. So, okay, last thing. I heard you're a big movie buff, and that in years past, some little birdie told me that you used to have to see, you and your husband used to go to see every Oscar-nominated movie, and the Oscars are tonight. So, can you tell me your favorite movie of all time? Go.
Gee, I don't know what my
Top
favorite
two.
Top two.
I was told I'd be surprised. Someone knows.
Oh, gee. I'm trying to think of what it is. That wonderful movie with Jimmy Stewart. That
It's a Wonderful Life.
The Wonderful Life. I did not like La La Land. I felt it was awful. Not awful, but there wasn't much there. I guess I loved Gone with the Wind. I thought it was a beautiful movie. And Casablanca, I mean, these are old ones, but boy, who will ever forget that kind of love and that kind of acting that were just remarkable.
Yeah,
I'd love to look at the old movies on television, too.
And I don't know when you have time to go to a movie, but I want to thank you for taking time to be
Thank
here
you.
today.
Thank you for having me. This is
you,
fun.
You bet. Listen, I had more fun than I think you did because I've been following you for so long and I never got to meet you. So thank you for your hard work. Thank you for being you. Thank you for paving the way for women. I'm sure there's a lot of women. I know women that have been elected that, have followed you. And, you were, I think, the second female state Senate president ever, or first?
I was the second.
Second, right.
Second.
So we've only had two in all of these years.
And
So-
now we have a third.
That's
The
right,
Senate
Karen
president,
Spilka, who's from
yes.
Ashland, which is also technically Metro West,
Right.
but we'll take it as Central Mass. So thank you to Senator Harriet Chandler, Harley Chandler, I can call you now.
Please.
Madam President, thank you for being here today. Appreciate it, and keep up the hard work. We really
you.
appreciate it. That's Community Conversations. I'm Vicki Green. Have a wonderful day.